We are knocking out every schedule for every Power 5 conference team in college football for 2014 here on Mark Rogers TV. But for Clemson, we've got a special request from Gaming with THOW. Gaming with THOW has requested not only the schedule preview, but predictions for every game. He's also mentioned that we could knock out a preview for the Clemson football team for 2014. If you've checked out our video post from previous seasons going into that particular fall's campaign, we have knocked out tons of previews. But with doing the schedules, with doing the 2 podcasts per week, doing the SEC in 60 every Monday, we have not done as many previews, although we have had on a number of bloggers to talk about Wisconsin fall camp, UCLA, Stanford, and some other schools as well, North Carolina, last Thursday with Jeff Greenberg. So we knock out Clemson, the schedule and the predictions. We will get those for you as we answer all requests here on Mark Rogers TV. We are efforting Ryan Cantor, our Clemson guy from Clemson 24/7, to talk Clemson football before the opener, a very difficult one for the second consecutive year against the Georgia Bulldogs. So let's talk some Clemson football, and we appreciate your support and your requests. And let's look at the Tigers here. So for a second consecutive season, yes, the Georgia Bulldogs. This time, Clemson takes on Georgia on the road between the hedges at Sanford Stadium. So, of course, Clemson came away with a huge win over the Bulldogs last season, 35-31. This time, I expect the Bulldogs to win this football game. Let's call it, I'm doing this off the top of my head, people. So let's not hold me to this. We will have our game predictions, top 25 predictions, week to week throughout the season. That's another thing to look forward to coming up in just a couple weeks. So Clemson, Georgia, I like the Bulldogs to win this game. Let's go 27-23 Bulldogs. Clemson takes on South Carolina State. They should wipe out South Carolina State in week 2 at home. That game's going to be about 48-6. Then Clemson takes on Florida State. And, of course, all Tiger fans would like to enact revenge on the hated Seminoles, their main division foe. Last season, Clemson had a very nice season in winning a BCS bowl game over Ohio State, completing the campaign at 11-2, top 7 in the country. However, that Florida State game was messy at home and clearly, at least for 2013, distinguished. Florida State is the class of the ACC and possibly the class of college football as they marched on to the BCS championship. Florida State's at home. They, of course, have all their playmakers back on offense for the most part, despite losing 2 running backs to the NFL. Clemson's going to go there and put up a better fight than actually they did, with more talent on offense and more explosiveness with Watkins and Bryant on the outside against Florida State. Let's say Florida State wins this game. I'm going to say 41-20 over Clemson in week 3. So at that point, the Tigers are going to be down at 1-2, facing 2 of the better teams in college football, as Florida State is preseason number 1 and Georgia right now at number 12 in the coaches poll. Then they've got a very difficult game, and if you check out our video posts in previewing the schedules here on Mark Rogers TV, especially in the SEC, the Big Ten, and the ACC, who you play in the other division is paramount. And for Clemson, this is one of the more difficult schedules in college football, and certainly the most difficult schedule in the ACC. Think about this. Clemson plays Georgia and South Carolina out of conference. So forget the gimmies against Georgia State that we'll talk about in just a minute, and the one we just covered against South Carolina State. Clemson's got those covered. No issues there. But South Carolina and Georgia, they've lost 5 consecutive games to the Gamecocks, and they've got Georgia in week 1. 2 of the best teams in the SEC, 2 top 12 teams preseason poll in the coaches poll. So Clemson also has to play Florida State and Louisville within its own division, and then its 2 non-division games are possibly the 2 best teams in the other division, arguably, in North Carolina, the only other ACC team that's ranked in the preseason top 25 at number 23, along with Clemson and Florida State, and then they take on Georgia Tech. So Clemson's got the most difficult schedule in the ACC, hands down. All right, again, that Georgia, South Carolina State, Florida State open. Then they've got North Carolina, a very difficult game at home, and they get by the Tar Heels, does Clemson, as they work out the new quarterback Stout. They get him flowing against a very difficult defense. At that point, that's 4 weeks in. They should be working on all cylinders, and especially a break in comparison to taking on that Florida State defense the week before on the road. So Clemson slips by North Carolina. Let's go with 30-23 in that game against North Carolina. Then they've got NC State, the Wolfpack, coming off a dismal 0-8 campaign, 3-9 overall, and Clemson wins that one over NC State. That game at home as well on October 4th. Tigers win that one over the Wolfpack at 42-13. Then they've got another difficult game against Louisville. So the Cardinals join the ACC and join that division with Clemson and Florida State at the top. So think about Clemson's first 6 games. They've got Georgia, Florida State, North Carolina, and Louisville within the first 6 weeks of the season. That's extremely difficult. They've got Louisville at home, so that's a 3rd consecutive home game for Clemson on Family Weekend on October 11th. And Clemson's going to have to win that game, and they do defeat the Cardinals in a good football game. Would love to see this one as well. Clemson wins this one over Louisville. We're going to go 27-17 over the Cardinals and Bobby Petrino. Clemson then travels to Boston College, gets a win against a retooled Boston College team, one that's building under Steve Addazio, but at the same time has lost one of the best running backs in college football at Andre Williams, along with their quarterback, Chase Reddick. So BC takes a bit of a step back. We previewed the Boston College schedule very recently. So on Saturday, October 18th, it's Clemson winning at Boston College. Let's call it at 33-14. Then there's a game against Syracuse at home. Tigers and the Orange on homecoming in Clemson. Saturday, October 25th. Clemson wins that game over Syracuse. Let's go with 34-16 over Clemson. Then they've got a game against Wake Forest, one of the 2 worst teams in the ACC. And Clemson marches on to victory on the road over Wake Forest, winning that one 45-12. Then they've got a game against Georgia Tech in Atlanta. Difficult game. Clemson at Georgia Tech. The Yellow Jackets, a fringe bowl team that should be able to make it to postseason play based on their non-conference slate. Probably going to be 4-4 within the ACC. This is a game that Clemson has to win. They can't trip up against anyone, considering they've got to play Florida State, Louisville in conference, and they've got, again, South Carolina and Georgia out of conference. That's 4 losses right there, potentially. Then you throw in the possibility of slipping up against North Carolina, which is not out of the realm of possibility. Clemson has got to hold against, of course, Wake Forest. They're going to win that game on the road. But against Georgia Tech, a mid-tier team in the ACC, Clemson's got to win that game against Georgia Tech, minus Vad Lee, who is transferred out of the program. Check out our Georgia Tech posts to get more insight into Georgia Tech personnel. Clemson wins that game on the road against Georgia Tech in Atlanta. Let's call that one 31-17. Then they got Georgia State in a blowout at home as they tune up for South Carolina, hoping to break the streak by the Gamecocks. Clemson over Georgia State on Military Appreciation Purple Out Day at Clemson, and the Tigers win that one, let's call it 52-9. Then the big showdown against South Carolina. This Gamecock defense is retooled with the front wall of Clowney, Sutton, and Charles gone. At the same time, the defensive backfield is very youthful. 1 scholarship cornerback played during the spring. Steve Spurrier bringing in 4-star recruits in the defensive backfield, but they're very young and they're very inexperienced. So South Carolina's defense is going to take a step back. The preseason prognosticators among the coaches poll very optimistic that South Carolina is a proven elite program holding at number 9 preseason. I expect the play of Connor Shaw to be missed. Dylan Thompson's a very capable quarterback, but he's not going to throw 1 interception this season. He's going to throw 8 or 10 picks this season for South Carolina. This is going to be a game that Clemson could steal against the Gamecocks, depending on the development of Stout and the offense. The Clemson defense, for once, is going to be stronger than the offense this season, especially for those first 3 to 5 weeks of the season. South Carolina, Clemson. This one is difficult for me to pull the trigger on August 11th for November 29th. But I will do it. I'm going to say Clemson can't do it. South Carolina wins this game and wins for a 6th straight season against Clemson. I just think that the Gamecocks' issues on defense will be rectified way before they travel to Clemson to take on the Tigers in Week 12. And Clemson's not issues. It's not a bad football team, but it's 16th ranked. I think that the preseason coaches poll have Clemson right about where they're going to finish and going 8-4. And I think this is one of the 4 losses for the Clemson football team at home against South Carolina. South Carolina wins this one at 24-21 over Clemson. So for the Tigers, they lose to Georgia in Week 1. They lose at Florida State in Week 3. Have a difficult game, but a win against North Carolina in Week 4. They've got another loss coming against South Carolina the final week of the season, and I think they slip up against somebody else. That could be North Carolina at home in Week 4. That could be against Louisville. That could be against Georgia Tech on the road. Even though I picked those game by game as a 9-3 campaign, I would expect the Clemson Tigers to slip up one other time to finish the campaign at 8-4 in 2014. I hope, gaming with THOW, I hope I delivered on this. I know it was kind of a weak preview, but I gave you the predictions. Again, it adds up to 9-3 if we go game by game, but I'm expecting out of that clump of North Carolina, Louisville, and Georgia Tech that there's going to be one more slip up for the Clemson Tigers this season. So not a vintage Clemson football team this season, especially in offense as they work things out and figure things out early on. And it's a very difficult schedule. Again, this is the toughest schedule in the ACC, talking Georgia, Florida State, North Carolina, Louisville, and Georgia Tech, and South Carolina to finish up. By far the most difficult slate in the ACC. All right, Clemson fans, let's hear it. And again, trying to get Ryan Cantor, our Clemson guy from Clemson 24/7, to talk more in depth of Clemson fall camp, personnel groupings, and position battles going into the opener against Georgia on the road in Sanford Stadium. Would love to hear from you next on Mark Rogers TV.